The trade talks involving Jacob Markstrom are starting to heat up despite Calgary trying to keep this on the down low. And what are my thoughts on the Stanley Cup Final so far? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Rider Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credentialed media member, Trey Matthews. It is June 10th. The day in which I am recording this episode. And on that particular day, 24 years ago, the New Jersey Devils defeated the Dallas Stars in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final and got their second Stanley Cup in franchise history. And on June 9th, 2003, the Devils defeated the Mighty Ducks in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final and got their third Stanley Cup in franchise history. Before we continue with today's episode, I want to acknowledge the late, great Hall of Famer Pat Burns, who was behind the Devils bench in 2003. Prior to taking the Devils job, Pat Burns was a head coach for the Boston Bruins and also the Toronto Maple Leafs. Prior to taking the Devils job, Pat Burns was the head coach for the Montreal Canadiens, Boston Bruins, and also Toronto Maple Leafs. Remember, the last time that the Devils hired a head coach who previously coached for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they hoisted the Stanley Cup. Here's to hoping that Sheldon Keefe can sort of repeat history, and I figured, why not bring up that factoid once again, since it's around that time in which the Devils were hoisting Stanley Cups, and it's been over 20 years. Can you believe it? For reference, I'm in my mid-20s, but let's not talk about the past. Let's talk about the present and also future. In the first segment, we're going to talk about some tradable options that the Devils have because things are starting to heat up in the trade market, and the Devils, they're a contender to possibly make a big splash to shake up the roster just a little bit. Then in the second segment, speaking of trade market, there's one particular goalie out in Calgary, and it seems like his destination might be New Jersey, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Then in the third segment, you know what? Why not talk about the Stanley Cup Final? I already talked about the Devils' pedigree of hoisting Stanley Cups. Why not talk about the current one? Because courtesy of Pucks and Pitchforks, my boss, Nick Villano, he released an article, and he talked about the comparisons between the current Florida Panthers and this Devils team. Remember, the Panthers have a Hart caliber trophy winner in Matthew Tkachuk. They also have Alexander Barkov, who just won the Selke. Great two-way player, similar to Nico Hischier, and Tkachuk, similar to Hughes. Maybe the Devils aren't too far off with a perennial Stanley Cup champion because the Panthers won Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, and I am recording this episode shortly before Game 2. Just for reference. But let's talk about some tradable options for the Devils. And it's courtesy of Cap Friendly. Rest in peace to Cap Friendly. They were recently bought by the Washington Capitals, and the site will go dark in July. Totally sucks, but luckily we have Puckopedia. But for right now, I want to use Cap Friendly as much as I can. Let's look at some potential trade options that the Devils have because I've been talking about it in prior episodes. When it comes to trade options, the Devils are running a little low. They don't have Fabian Zetterlund, Shakir Mukhamadullin, Nikita Hotuk, which, by the way, all those players were used in one particular deal, and that was to get Timo Meier. The Devils might have to sacrifice a player that they probably like, but in order to fix the roster, you might have to play a little hardball here. All right, let's look at Cap Friendly. In terms of players who are here long-term, Timo Meier, Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, Andre Palat still has 3 years remaining on his deal. In terms of forwards, the Devils don't really have that many options to choose from. Do you trade away Erik Haula? Personally, I'm going to say no. I saw someone comment in my more recent video and say that, why do you hold on to Erik Haula? Well, simple, because Devils discourse has been complaining about having no grit or determination. Erik Haula is the epitome of that. He can do face-offs. He can play a little physical. He can get those dirty goals. He knows how to play hard-nosed hockey, and he's a great leader to have in the locker room. And that was on full display to close out the 2022-2023 season. And he was also vital during the playoffs. I don't think Erik Haula is an option, and I would be stunned, like beyond stunned, if the Devils traded him away. What's a good word for beyond stunned? Oh, flabbergasted. There we go. I'd be flabbergasted if Erik Haula is included in any trade packages. And it seems like Jack Hughes and the others will vouch for him. I don't think Erik Haula is an option if I'm being realistic, and he shouldn't be either. Curtis Lazar, he has 1 year remaining on his deal. He has a cap hit of $1 million, and then he'll become an unrestricted free agent. Similar to Erik Haula, you don't trade away Curtis Lazar. Physical player, meat and potatoes hockey, and his offensive game has improved ever since being acquired by the Devils. He had a career high in points just this past season. Unfortunately, it was overshadowed by the Devils' poor effort in general. So I think Curtis Lazar deserves a lot more respect. I think the only option when it comes to forwards is Alexander Holtz. He has 1 year remaining on his entry-level contract, and it doesn't seem like he's going to be given the amount of ice time that people think he deserves. The thing about Holtz is that he's pretty decent offensively, but when it comes to defense and puck handling, he sometimes struggles, which makes him a liability. And the thing is like, I think Alexander Holtz deserves more ice time just because you need to allow him to make those mistakes so he can learn and grow. And I disagree with what Tom Fitzgerald, Lindy Ruff, and Travis Green to an extent. I disagree as to how they assess Alexander Holtz, because Fitzgerald was quoted to say that he didn't think that Holtz was having a good year, and this was around January, February. I think Alexander Holtz was showing what he's capable of doing, but it doesn't seem like the organization is really that high on him. In fact, during exit interviews last year, they told him, you got to step up your game. Otherwise, you're going to be on the bench, you're going to be a healthy scratch, or you might be dealt away. That's the thing. I don't think Alexander Holtz is going to be given the chance that he deserves to really thrive and learn and grow, because I had Ben Burnell on this show last summer, and I asked him, like, what's the difference between Alexander Holtz in the NHL and Alexander Holtz in the AHL? Why is he thriving in minor league hockey and it's not really translating into the NHL? And he says, like, Kevin Dineen gives him a much longer leash to learn from his mistakes. And I don't think the Devils are going to be as patient with Alexander Holtz. And take it how you want to take it. He's been in trade discussions before. Quite honestly, I was surprised that he was not included in the Timo Meier package. But Holtz might be an option in terms of tradable assets. Then when you look on the defensive side of things, it's even worse. John Marino, he signed for 3 more seasons. Jonas Siegenthaler, he has 4 more seasons. Curtis McDermott, he just signed a new deal, but I think they're going to utilize McDermott more as a forward than a defenseman. Kevin Ball, he has 1 year remaining on his deal. Luke Hughes, he has 1 year remaining on his entry-level contract. And Simon Nemec, he has 2 years remaining on his entry-level contract. And remember, Dougie Hamilton, he has 4 years remaining, and he has a cap hit of $9 million. The defense is interesting, and I'll talk more about this in the second segment. I don't think Tom Fitzgerald should trade away any of the Devils' defensemen, because just a little bit of a hint, defense was also an issue for New Jersey. And if you trade away one of those assets, then I think you're leaving yourself a little more vulnerable. We'll talk more about that in the second segment because it ties into the Jacob Markstrom trade. But before we continue, let me tell you about FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Final, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Shohei Ohtani. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summertime bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com and remember to always gamble responsibly. All right. Rumors surrounding Jacob Markstrom are heating up. Courtesy of Alex Chavancy, former writer over at the Hockey Writers and current Independent Devils podcaster, he put out a couple days ago and said, on 32 Thoughts, Elliot Freeman says that the Flames are trying to do a Jacob Markstrom trade as quietly as possible, but there's definitely something going on. A lot of people are suspecting the Devils are involved, but Toronto and Ottawa could be other teams interested too. He recently put this out and said, Chris Johnson on his podcast in regards to Jacob Markstrom said, quote, I have a belief that the Devils get this done. He's not reporting the trade framework is done, but it feels like the ingredients are there to eventually get a trade done with New Jersey. All right, that's interesting, and I talked about it in a recent episode. Which goalie can the Devils get? People have their difference of opinions. Jacob Markstrom, Linus Ullmark, John Gibson, Elvis Merzlikins, UC Saros, you name it. The Devils have been linked to a lot of goalies. But I said in my silly season episode that if I had to make an educated guess, if I had to put money on it, I would say Jacob Markstrom. And keep in mind, I have no inside information on this matter, but I'm just speaking from my perspective. I think this is Tom Fitzgerald's best option in terms of getting a goalie for a few reasons. One, you can look at his age. He's 34 and he has 2 years remaining on his deal. I don't think he's going to be as expensive as the other goalies. For Linus Ullmark, you might have to include that first-round draft pick, which is at number 10 overall. For UC Saros, you're going to have to break the bank. John Gibson, his contract scares me. Elvis Merzlikins, I think you could do a little better. There's all sorts of narratives. But the thing is like Jacob Markstrom, he has made it known that he is not too happy with how the Flames have been handling his trade circumstance, especially since he has a no movement clause. And it's been reported that he has waived that clause to be traded to New Jersey. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of when will Jacob Markstrom be out of Calgary. And the other options, they're just going to be very expensive if you ask me. And when looking at trade assets that the Devils have, I talked about the forwards. The Devils don't really have that many options. Alexander Holtz, maybe. Eric Haula, maybe. Unlikely. Curtis Lazar, same way. Dawson Mercer, I think the Devils are going to work on to get him extended. I don't think you include him in any trade packages. And even then, it's like, who's going to break the bank for an aging goalie who has put up some solid numbers, I will admit. And when looking at other tradable assets that the Devils have, in the first round, yes, they have one draft pick, and that's the 10th overall. But here's the thing. The Devils have 2 third-round picks, they have 2 fifth-round picks, and they have 1 sixth-round pick. I think you could include a third-round draft pick to get Jacob Markstrom, and I think the Flames would still be interested. I don't think Markstrom is worth the 10th overall pick, if you ask me. Not for an aging goalie who only has 2 years remaining on his contract. The Bruins, probably going to demand for that 10th overall pick. The Predators, you could best believe that they would demand for that 10th overall pick. But for the Flames, especially with how frayed the relationship is between them and Markstrom, I don't think they're going to be as greedy. And when it comes to defense, I think it's best for Tom Fitzgerald to keep that intact. Defense has been an issue for New Jersey, and I don't think it's smart to include any of the defensemen in any sort of trade circumstance. Because one of the complaints that a lot of people have for this Devils team is, yes, they're too soft, but they give up a lot of odd man rushes. They sometimes find themselves on an island on 2-on-1 advantages in favor of the opponent. If you trade away John Marino or Jonas Siegenthaler, 2 players that focus more on defense than offense, does that really make you any better? I know that they weren't their sharpest this past season, but let's just say you include Jonas Siegenthaler in a trade package. Who's going to take his spot? Seamus Casey? That's going to make you worse, in my opinion, because now you have 3 inexperienced blue liners in Nemitz, Hughes, and now Casey. That is not a recipe for a championship team. I just think the whole Devils blue line, they weren't really their sharpest this past season, whether they were offensive-minded defensemen or had more of an emphasis on defense. Everyone needs to improve on the Devils blue line. And if you take one of them out of the equation, they just get significantly worse. Case in point with Dougie Hamilton. A lot of people complained about Dougie Hamilton's impact. And I said it. Dougie Hamilton will be dearly missed. And the Devils power play, it went from best of the best in the league to dropping month after month after month. At one point, weren't they like 2 for 40-something on the man advantage? So they went from the first position to like 12th or 13th in the entire league, which goes to show you how dominant their power play was early on, considering the fact that they struggled mightily in the second half. The Devils need to add to their defense, not take a piece away and try to replace that piece. No, you need to add more pieces in order to make it stronger. So I think any defenseman included in a trade is a no-go. Forwards, you're a little limited, but in terms of draft picks, I think you can include a draft pick and a prospect here and there to get Jacob Markstrom. And you don't have to sacrifice the 10th overall pick, if that makes sense. So I think Jacob Markstrom is the realistic choice for Devils. And I know that there's other teams competing for his services, similar to what Alex Javansi said. But if I had to make a hunch, if I had to make an educated guess, I think Tom Fitzgerald knows that his best chance of getting a legitimate goalie is in Calgary. And I think he has to do whatever it takes to get that goalie without breaking the bank. But that's your update on Jacob Markstrom, and I think the Devils have a good shot of getting him. All right, to wrap up today's episode, let's talk about the Stanley Cup Final. Like I said in the first segment, I am recording this episode shortly before Game 2, so I have no idea how it's going to go. I did predict Panthers in 6, but if the Oilers tie it up, especially now Game 3 heading back to Edmonton, things can definitely change because there goes home ice advantage. But I think this series falls into the favor of the Panthers. And John Fisher, who is a writer over at allaboutthejersey.com, he put out on X and said, I see the grit, toughness, and physical play of Sergei Bobrovsky stopping everything which doomed the Oilers in Game 1. I definitely agree because the Oilers were creating some decent looks on Bobrovsky, and they were at points quicker than the Panthers. But Bobrovsky, I said, he is strong in net. It's going to be hard to fool him, and that's why the Oilers were shut out in Game 1. But continuing with Fisher's statement, incidentally, goaltending was way more legitimate issue with New Jersey last season than some on Twitter complaining about the toughness of people they've never met. All right. I agree with most of what he said. I still think toughness needs to be a point of emphasis for the Devils. I think it's a two-way street. I don't think it's pick one or the other. I think it can't hurt to add some more physicality. And I think that was evident in the Devils locker room because sometimes they admitted that they weren't really playing with much effort. Sometimes they were playing a little soft, immature, playing scared. Physicality can go a long way. I don't want to say it's pick one or the other. That's my personal opinion. But here's the thing that I did respond to Fisher about. I said, that's why I picked the Panthers in 6. The Devils could learn a thing or two from the Panthers because I said that while the Oilers have legitimate offense, it seems like the Panthers, they have way more grit, they have more toughness, and it goes from offense to defense to goaltending. The Panthers are going to be a tough out for the Oilers, and I would love to see Adam Henrique hoist up the cup, but I just don't think it's in the cards for the Oilers. That's just my opinion. Now, Nick Villano, my boss over at Pucks and Pitchforks, responded to my tweet and said, definitely one thing, and I gave the article a look, and I must say I agree with pretty much everything he said when comparing the Panthers to the Devils. If you want to check out his thoughts on the matter, I will leave a link in the description to that article, but let me read you some snippets. He said, the Devils have pieces that could match some of the contributions of the Panthers. Nico Hischier is a light version of Alexander Barkov. Here's the thing. I still think that despite the injury-riddled year for Nico, he was still pretty serviceable for the Devils. But Barkov, he just won the Selke, and Hischier was runner-up in the Selke race last season. Jack Hughes can easily match the offensive contributions of Matthew Tkachuk. Jesper Bratt has 40-goal upside in the best possible scenario, just like Sam Reinhart. Dougie Hamilton, while injured, could match the contributions of Aaron Ekblad. All right, there you go. I've talked about this core for the Devils before. Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, and I also want to add Timo Meier to the mix because 40-goal scorers who have the body frame of a power forward do not grow on trees. That is a valuable asset that the Devils have, and I don't care what anyone says about Dougie Hamilton. He is still important on this team, similar to what I said in the previous segment. And the Devils, it's going to be a gift once he returns fully healthy to start the 2024-2025 season. Villano also added and said the Devils should not be going after toughness for toughness' sake this offseason. We saw what happened when the Toronto Maple Leafs did that, adding Max Domi, Tyler Bertuzzi, and Ryan Reeves because they are gritty players and ignoring how they fit makes no sense. Reeves was just an abysmal signing, but at least Domi and Bertuzzi weren't terrible. However, they seem to take a little of each other's values. Yeah, you're right. When it comes to making a splash signing or making a trade, you've got to find what fits. And for the Devils, I think if they get someone who is good in the faceoffs, but is also a decent two-way player, I think that will go a long way. But it goes back to what I said about the Curtis McDermott signing. If the Devils are good, I don't expect to see Curtis McDermott suit up for most nights, if I'm just being completely honest, because he's not the most efficient player on the rink. Even when he does play, he's not playing all that heavy minutes. That's my advice for Tom Fitzgerald, which is when it comes to signing, make sure it fits the system. Fast-paced, high-octane offense. But similar to what Villano said in his article, I do see some similarities between the Devils and the Panthers. And if they could just get some toughness, if they could get some grit and just round out that roster and try to add more to their defense, not take away, add more to their defense, this Devils team can go a long way. Will they become Stanley Cup contenders this upcoming season? I'll have to see how the offseason shakes out. I'm not going to jump the gun on anything. I'm not going to put too high expectations for them. But I think this season was a bit of a fluke for New Jersey. I know they've only gone to the playoffs 2 or 3 times the last decade or so. But I don't think that 2022-2023 season was a fluke. I think this Devils team, if fully healthy, they really do have something special. But Tom Fitzgerald, he's got to tweak it a little bit, and it's been something I've been preaching on this show. Decent goaltending, more toughness defensively, and just more depth in terms of forwards. This team can go places. Replace the production of Miles Wood and Michael McLeod. Replace the production of Damon Severson and Ryan Graves. And try to find someone who is steady in net for both the playoffs and also the regular season. Because Vitek Vanecek, decent in the regular season, not so good in the playoffs. But let me know what you guys think. Do you see any similarities between the Panthers and the Devils? And what are your thoughts on Jacob Markstrom? Because that might be the avenue in which Tom Fitzgerald is heading down to fix the goaltending tandem. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on the show's X-Page app at Locked On Devils or my personal X-Page app at TreyMatt4. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.